What's the most insane thing you've put your body through? I carried a woman 4 miles down a rocky trail after discovering she'd injured herself. Storms were approaching and she was not quite below treeline. I learned later that she'd broken her tibia and fibula. I'm a 5 feet 6, 130 pounds woman. I was insanely sore the next day. 7 years of extreme alcohol abuse to the point that my liver was on the verge of failing and my doc told me either I quit or die inside of the next year. That was 26 years ago and now I'm a proud grandpa. I just survived a 13.5-hour surgery. I had a blood infection that covered my insides and my heart. It led to valve replacement. But clearing the infection is what took forever. Then, 8 days on the ECMO machine while in an induced coma. And a total of 50 days in the hospital. I'm incredibly lucky to be alive. I'm 66. It forced me to retire. A juice diet for 22 days. On the 22nd day my juicer jammed on a carrot. And the cup on the bottom that catches the juice fired out at Mach 3, sending carrot juice all over my kitchen. I said, "Fuck this," and drove straight to an out. Windshield. 2 rounds of chemo along with monthly shots that kick my bone marrow into overdrive. Slated for my 3rd chemo round by year's end. My leukemia is treatable but not curable, so I get to do this every so often until a cure is found. Edit. Thank you so much for all your comments. And my first awards. I wanted to state, since it's been asked a couple times, that my leukemia is a rare subset of chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLE. I don't like sharing the exact type to maintain some anonymity online, as I'm heavily involved in advocacy and thus would be easy to track IRL, but if anyone is interested, I'll gladly share more info via PM. As for now, I'm headed back to bed. Best to everyone and big hugs to everyone going through similar. I once went through an intense bout of serotonin syndrome, not intentionally. My doctor prescribed me 2 antidepressants that shouldn't be taken together. I ended up taking 2 high doses of one of them, then about 8 hours later I was in a hospital with severe anxiety. Shakes. Fever. Extremely high heart rate. Etc. I was like that for about 4 days before I was discharged, and then the effects didn't fully wear off for nearly a month. Absolute worst time of my life, and I struggled to even grasp what all my body went through during that time. I told myself I could run a marathon. So I started training. And did pretty good to start. I did a couple of 10 kiloseconds and a 20K. I scheduled a half marathon and trained for it and did fine while training. Well, the day of the half marathon it was so much hotter and humid than I had trained for. About 5 miles and I realized I was in trouble. I was sweating like crazy. And I couldn't hydrate fast enough. About 9 miles and I started cramping and had to walk. I decided to push through and ended up walking the rest of the way. Then I sat down and everything in my body started cramping. My toes, fingers, sides, neck, legs. It was awful. My wife saw I was doing bad and went and got a medic. Then the next thing I remember, I woke up in the back of an ambulance. My wife was there as well. It took us to the closest hospital and put me on an IV to rehydrate me. And about 8 hours later I started feeling better. Once spent 56 hours in a row awake when I deployed to Iraq. And it wasn't like an overnight gaming session. It was August in a fucking desert with full gear. The regular sleep cycle was already shit. But we kept taking mortars during my sleep cycles. There was a point around 40 hours in that I thought I would die of exhaustion. And a small part of me wished the mortars would at least offer some relief. Alcoholism to the point of alcoholic hepatitis. After 7 days of detox. I'm 14 days sober. I worked a 22-hour shift. Went home and slept for about 4 hours. And worked another 10-hour shift. I didn't know what exhaustion truly was until then. I am pretty sure I was minutes away from passing out. Years of IV heroin abuse. Don't recommend. Not just because you might catch hep while ruining life. But because there ain't no heroin out there no more. Game's fucked. Stay far the fuck away from the game, youngins. It'll kill you these days. I signed up for a medical trial study for $5,000. It was an established drug, so they knew exactly what it would do to me. That was coming off patent and the new manufacturer had to go through trials. The main side effect they warned me of was bone pain. I had to do 2 x 3-day inpatient stays. One shot in the arm and blood draws every hour or so. We all had to eat the same food at the same time. And it was more food than I could physically stomach, but had to choke it down or risk not getting paid. Food was good though. I got the bone pain and was allergic to the drug lol. I called the nurse about some weird spots on my arm. And she told me they were mosquito bites. I accepted this even though I knew 100% they were not mosquito bites that had somehow arisen in the past 2 minutes, but whatever. And then my breathing started getting all wheezy. So I called her over again. She very calmly told me everything was fine and then sprinted out of the room to get a doctor while my throat started closing up. They gave me an antihistamine and everything was all good. Except now my data was worthless, so they said I didn't have to come back for the second stay and could go after my third day was up and I would still get paid. Total win in my book. However, I did get the bone pain side effect. My hips and thighs were aching relentlessly the whole time and I had a terrible headache. They couldn't give me anything other than paracetamol for it. So that kinda sucked. But it wasn't too bad. At least the bed was comfy. IDK if it was the drug. Or the reaction. Or the antihistamine. Or the bone pain. Or the buckets of food they were making me eat. But I slept for pretty much the next 50 hours. When I wasn't sleeping I was binging BoJack on the free Wi-Fi. And then got to go home with $5,000, before tax. 10 out of 10 would get bone pain again. 30 years of hardcore alcoholism and drug addiction. Shouldn't even be here, but I am smiley face. Sober 13. 5 years now. A 73-mile triathlon in the Guatemalan jungle. Worked in the game industry shipping a game that rather unexpectedly became a global phenomenon that absolutely none of us were prepared for. Solution? Have producers coordinate teams in time zones across the world so that devs get to sleep but work continues. Except, as the more junior producer, I had no bargaining rights for time off. Even for just a weekend. After over 18 months without a day off and not getting more than 3 hours of sleep at a time, gotta meet with those global teams. My body just gave up. I ignored the resting heart rate of 120. Blood pressure through the roof. Constant migraines, industry standard. They say. But then tremors. GI issues. Memory and hair loss started to get me worried. Stupidly. The wake-up call was my boss scolding me for underperforming while she was taking weekends off and reasonable amounts of vacation time. My arguments to HR fell on deaf ears and all I got back was, if you're serious about being a producer in this industry, you have to really want it. So I left the industry. It took 3 years to repair the bulk of the damage. But look, there's not a single corporate job out there that's worth your life. I don't care if it sounds like your dream job. It's still a company and you are expendable to them. Pregnancy and childbirth. F#CK all that noise. Worked 2 jobs. Became a lot more friendlier with alcohol during that time. Tried to get fit doing exercise. Started doing coke. Had this going on for about 2 years, the coke was only about 6 months. Got a single good paying job now. No coke. Alcohol socially. Decided fit isn't for me, hee hee. I wore a full wetsuit to a beach-themed party and wore it the whole night. Losing around 200 pounds in a year or maybe a few more months. I don't remember. Went to the gym for 3 hours 6 days out of the week. That's also includes 30 minutes there and back walk. I can't remember much of how little I ate. I was in my early 20s. I went from 425 to 190. And #X200B. Edit for more details. I was 190-ish for 4 years until depression hit and I gained a lot of weight again. I was about 375. Then I did it again, but not that much of going to the gym. I dropped down to 180-ish in 2 years. Then 1 year later major depression happened again and I ballooned up to 295. That's what I was 5 months ago and now I'm around 253 right now. Alcoholism. My rock bottom and reason for immediately stopping happened overnight after waking in the morning to throwing up blood. I went through the withdrawals at home and I'm still sober 18 days in. I've had poison pumped through my body. I mean, I'm alive because of the chemotherapy, but still insane to think about. For me at least. Taking a shit so massive I'm surprised I didn't split in half. Cocaine addiction. I looked like a bundle of sticks in an airtight garbage bag and my nose was always bleeding because I would pick at it. Barely ate or slept. Did far too much walking and energy drinks for how little I was eating. I was an absolute mess. Always sick with a cold as well, cause I'd do coke anywhere there was a flat surface. Thankfully I didn't lose my nose or have any physical problems from my addiction. I got lucky. Serious? A decade of severe self-harming. Otherwise? I'd honestly argue that playing tuba for 2 hours at a concert in a heat wave in all black clothing was pretty intense. Chemotherapy. It's been 5 years since I finished and I've never felt the same since. But hey, I beat cancer, so I'm okay with this. 3 years of hardwood flooring in the Florida heat and humidity. That was some of the hardest work I've ever done. Moving thousands of pounds worth of wood flooring and plywood to job sites. Carrying 100+ pound rolls of underlayment up several flights of stairs. Then crawling on my knees all day. Working while hunched over. Shit was fucking my body up. Alcohol addiction. Toxic, abusive relationship. Overdosed on tramadol, went to hospital for kidney failure. 12 years of binge drinking. 5 months clean. Anorexia for 4 years. Extreme starvation and dehydration. In recovery 13 years. A marathon. 26. 2 miles is no joke. About 2 years of anorexia and severe alcoholism sprinkled with panic attacks and damn near agoraphobia. Had pancreatitis 12 times. Alcoholic hepatitis. Diverticulitis. And blood pressure around 200/116. Labor, delivery. Anorexia nervosa. Over a year of meth use. Can't believe I'm okay now. Spinal cord stimulator implanted in January. The post-op pain was absolutely brutal for the first 3 weeks. With painkillers and muscle relaxers. 6 months out and the pain I'm being treated for is doing great. But the incision site on my back still gives me grief more often than I'd like. I've been through Navy boot camp, 1979. And I thought the physical training was bad. Bodybuilding competitions. Saving money for a PS5. Had to eat soup for months. And now I hate soup and don't have a PS5. 96 hours straight of end-of-life care for a close friend. I did have a few naps in there and got in showers. But it was fucking grueling and not a thing I wish to repeat. 90 hours of on-my-feet jobs per week came kind of close to the caretaking. But that level of total exhaustion is something I hope to never have to repeat. Specifically the mental exhaustion. 2 full-term pregnancies. The first. I developed something hell-like called PUPPPs for the last 6 weeks. I was so itchy I couldn't sleep unless my husband was gently tickling my skin. My entire abdomen, the tops of my arms and the tops of my thighs erupted in thick stretch marks filled with hives all over. I would go in the shower and just cry for hours. It was awful. The second. My pelvis completely separated and I could barely walk or lay in bed normally without searing pain. I had to wear a brace to keep myself from doing more damage as my uterus grew. Blacking out on shots of Rumpel Minze the night before I was admitted to the hospital for sepsis. Got out a week later and continued to get blackout drunk nightly. That and shooting up bath salts. No one will probably see this, but who cares? When I was 16 I was trying to get into a program that sends you on trips. To be able to go on the trip, after passing an interview, you had to complete a 5K run. At the time I was a very obese kid. Never even ran a mile. We had 3 weeks to prepare. But I've always been a procrastinator. Come the day before the race, I go practice for the first time. I can't run even half a mile. Realize I'm fucked, but then I convinced myself it's all in my head. As long as I want it enough, I can do it. It's the day of the race. I'm pumping myself up. We start running. About half a mile in. I feel I can keep going anymore. Just keep pushing myself. I ended up finishing the race without stopping or walking, in about 45 minutes. A few months later and I'm on the trip I got sent on. One of the days of my trip, I hiked almost 27 miles. In a single day. As an overweight kid whose main exercise was walking to the fridge. I ordered a 20-piece meal of boneless wings from Wingstop. Large voodoo fries and a Dr. Pepper. Ate it all by myself. When I was 10, I wore my tennis shoes far too tight for far too long. and ended up with ingrown toenails on my big toes. I would try and take care of them. Pull the end out of the toe and try to let it heal before I attempted to clip off the excess, to keep the nail from simply growing back into the hole. But it always came back. Ended up having an infection in my big toes for 2 years straight, which culminated in my toes being red and painfully inflamed for days at a time. At one point, my toenail had grown through my toe and was coming out the bottom of the pad. Had surgery to fix everything, and now one of my big toes has a toenail that doesn't grow at all, and one that grows a normal toenail and then a smaller toenail slightly off to the left of that. But yeah, 2-year-long infection. The doctor heard that and the first words out of their mouth were, well, realistically, you should have already lost your leg. I got my arm caught in an industrial-sized wood chipper. I missed that thing. I had elective butthole surgery, hemorrhoidectomy, on Monday. I had never farted blood before this week. But it hasn't stopped yet. Worked a presidential campaign. Involved 6 months of sleep deprivation, gray area drug abuse, and a terrible diet. Deep into benzo and heroin addiction, I ran out of drugs in a hotel room, and began to withdraw from heroin, methadone and Xanax at the same time. Became so sick I slipped into a state of delirium and began to hallucinate complex scenarios. I thought I was a mental patient trapped in an abusive mental asylum. I thought I was part of some breakthrough experimental study. I hallucinated all sorts of these places and situations I believed I was in. At one point, cops shooting through the windows, when in reality I was slumped on the bathroom floor. My legs did not work at that point. I had not drank water in a few days, let alone food. On the 5th day, going on 3 days of hallucinating, I had a brief moment of lucidity regarding my physical state. I couldn't feel my entire right leg or move it. My whole body was shaking and in immeasurable pain. I didn't know where I was. Using my last energy, I dragged my body across the floor out of the bathroom to the front door of the apartment. I fell many times trying to reach the handle. I figured I was actually outside, so I just began knocking. I lay there knocking until a cleaner heard at some point and checked what was wrong. I was brought to the ER via ambulance in a state pretty close to death. Apparently the delirium wasn't just from withdrawals. My body had been overcome by an infection, which they found evidence of first on a valve of my heart through ultrasound. My right leg's nerves had been attacked by the infection, hence the loss of feeling and ability to move it at the knee. I regained function in my leg 6 months later, which was wonderful. Still with limited sensation, but just happy I can run. I also had a tube put in to drain 1.5 L of fluid from my right lung, which was technically collapsed from the infection too. It really just ravaged my body while it was so vulnerable in the benzo and opiate withdrawals. I recovered for 2 months in hospital on multiple IV antibiotics daily. One which made me puke my guts up from 4 a.m. till I went to sleep that night. I never found out which one. That was probably the most insane thing I put my body through in a short period of time during my addictions. Other than stories of benzo withdrawal seizures I had back when I abused Xanax. Thankfully I am clean from hard drugs these days. For a good few years now, smiley face. Alcohol addiction, smoking cigarettes, and years of self-harm. 3 attempted suicides, pills, neglecting my hygiene and teeth. Going to rehab in October and am going to change my life. I feel like an old man. I'm 23. I had a boil on my butt one time and I simply didn't want to deal with it. So I tried to ignore it, hoping it'd go away. I learned the hard way it doesn't work like that. And after 2 weeks of being in excruciating pain, I finally went to the hospital and got it drained. For my obstinance, I earned myself a staph infection and was on antibiotics for another 2 weeks, which made me extremely fatigued. So my stubbornness cost me a functional month of enjoyment and use of my life. Shooting up heroin, meth for several months. I lost 30 pounds. Never slept. Lived out of my car and then on the streets. I went through a drug-induced psychosis and started hearing voices. Convinced myself that there were people out to get me. I finally got arrested and when I was booked weighed 109 pounds. I'm 5 feet 10 inches. It was a long recovery. I'm thankful for the experience and all the people who helped get me through it. My mind, body and spirit were completely destroyed. It's been 8 years and I'm still not sure how I made it this far. Edit. I was using heroin exclusively for 5 years on and off. It was the meth that really accelerated my decline. Don't do either of those drugs. And especially that combination. If you're struggling with an addiction, just know that it is absolutely possible to get clean. It takes a tremendous amount of work, but it is possible. Don't give up hope. Ever. 35 years of skateboarding. 2 shoulder and 2 knee surgeries. At the age 39 to 45. Wouldn't change a second, but goddamn does my body fucking hurt. A lot. Knee is healed. Going to get a new setup soon. Jumping out of airplanes for the army. It was a shit ton of fun though. Getting food poisoning. Worst feeling ever. Do not recommend. I was severely ill-equipped for a winter camping trip as I didn't expect for it to reach 17 degrees F. I woke up in my hammock violently shivering even though I was wearing a thick jacket. Never again. Drank a fifth of Bacardi Limon in less than a minute. Unsurprisingly ended up in the hospital. Supposedly I passed out and started choking on my own vomit. Couple decades of hard drinking. Woodstock 99. I lived in my little Nissan through Denver winter because I was dead certain somebody else needed the shelter bed worse that I could have occupied. Many nights. It was so cold we had icicles growing down from the roof of the car. Well, this isn't something I chose to put my body through. But having BPD and bipolar. Choosing to get married too young for no other reason than I didn't want to say no and it seemed responsible. Then, the night before the wedding. Working an overnight shift because I couldn't say no. Then working immediately after the wedding because I couldn't say no. Then falling asleep on the drive home. Crashing and wrecking my body. Then spending about 2 years hating myself and bottling my feeling. Expertly slaughtering the marriage. Hey, that gnarly scar that consumes half an arm and back looks cool. Though. Hyperemesis gravidarum during my pregnancy. Currently sick and having panicked flashbacks to the nausea. The vomiting. The IV bags I had to switch at home. And just generally. Not being able to eat or drink anything. Even water. For weeks. Pregnancy for 9 months and then traumatic birth. The existence of the human race is a miracle and a testament to the strength of the female body and spirit. 52-mile ultramarathon. That effing hurt. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.